it's Annette Ba'u, and welcome to the Millionaire Insider. Thank you so much for joining us. For over 30 years, I've been advising and researching the top 1% and 2% of millionaires to learn what millionaires with amazing lives do differently. And now I'm providing you practical, easy to implement insight so you can succeed in your business, your life, and with your money. And today, my friends, you're in for another real treat with my conversation with Doug Healy. This was one of them that I did a few years ago, and when I went back and listened to it, it had so many amazing nuggets. He's got such an amazing life, an amazing family. I've been able to spend time with him and his wife. I love his values. I love his motivation, his drive, his philosophy. You're going to learn so many insights from this, so please take advantage of it. But before we dive in, please hit subscribe so you get notified of the episodes as well as the bonuses. Today's episode is sponsored by Mindset Mastery. You can go to millionaireseries.com/mindset mastery. Let's face it, my friends, whether you want to more successfully work with affluent clients, you want to succeed in your business, or you want to become financially free, the first step is you have to master your mindset. And today's free training provides you that. Again, millionaireseries.com/mindset mastery. So today's freebie is our Millionaire Habits Guide. If you want to learn how millionaires think and what they do so that you can either serve them or become one, you've got to learn how they think and what they do, how they create habits. You can go to millionaireseries.com/MHG. Again, Millionaire Habits Guide for MHG. So millionaireseries.com/MHG to access the Millionaire Habits Guide. And we always have a disclosure. All materials and forms and intellectual property are copywritten by the millionaireseries.com. These episodes are not designed to provide you investment, financial planning, insurance, estate planning, any type of planning advice, or healthcare advice. You've got to check with your own team of advisors. By listening to these episodes, you agree to hold millionaireseries.com and its affiliates harmless for results achieved or not achieved, and any reproduction of this material is allowed only with written authorization from the millionaireseries.com. All international copyrights are reserved. So now let's dive into the conversation. And the one thing I want you to do, please take notes, listen, re-listen, and most importantly, apply it. Telling you this, my friends, is a game-changing conversation, and especially if you apply the information, you're going to love the results you get. That I am certain of. So let's dive in.
Well, thank you, Nan. I think it's a privilege to be part of your program, and I look forward to working with some of the other people in the program down the road. That's a real bonus for me as well.
There's some great ones, and it doesn't even seem like work. But every time I do these, I learn so much. This is like a PhD because I did it just so that people could learn from other people, but it's amazing what I myself am learning. So it's just been a wonderful experience. So again,
Great.
I really thank you. Your wife is just wonderful. I didn't realize I was talking to her. She's just delightful.
You know, that's one big issue in my life that I haven't had to deal with in a negative sense, right? So it's been a real positive thing. And so she's always gone along with me and more than carried her weight. And she's been a real blessing to me, that's for sure.
I want to talk about some of the key points in your upbringing. You had some experiences all over the world, including living in Pakistan, and I'm so excited to hear your story.
My parents were with the Red Cross and with the Ford Foundation, a couple of nonprofits, so we lived in Pakistan. That's where my younger brother was born. I was born in Frankfurt. That was a very great opportunity for all of us, because I think one thing I learned there is to appreciate what we so often take for granted here in the States. And even though I was very young when we lived there, it made a strong impression on me. And it's really helped me in a lot of things in life, and not only appreciation and gratitude, but also in conservation. So many Americans have a tendency to be so wasteful, and I think that was ingrained into me at an early age. And one of the things I always heard was, eat it up, wear it out, make it do, or go without. And we've kind of brought the boys up with that philosophy, too, because it's not only important to be a good steward of your money, but it's also important to not be wasteful. And that's something I think that was ingrained to me, almost to a fault, to some extent. Blame my parents for two things, that and also for giving me a work ethic that requires me to spend more time working than I'd really like to. One of the things that I've learned is lack of financial strength or insecurity, I guess you might even say, on my part, has helped drive me. And I was not in a situation where I was going to be supported by anybody down the road. So that kind of gave me the incentive to be financially successful and get stable. Probably so many of your clients are in the same position. And that's what I've tried to instill into my boys, is that it's the you element, basically. You've got to be responsible for yourself and don't look or hope or rely on somebody else taking care of you. If you have that element and you work a little bit harder for the future rewards, it makes it a lot easier to put the time in. Then we came to Northern California.
So you get that it's more than just making money. It's really about making money and helping others.
Yeah, my parents always felt that was really important.
That's awesome. So obviously there were some defining moments in your life. And let's dive into your school, because you obviously have a really interesting background in sports and in your academics.
Oh, I just went to Fremont High School in Sunnyvale, California.
So were there some events that you felt were really defining?
Oh, not really. I mean, I enjoyed it. I had a good high school experience. Then I went to a local community college. I just couldn't afford the university fees at that point in time, so I was real fortunate. I went to De Anza Community College and had a phenomenal coach. That would be a defining moment. He was an Olympic water polo coach, and he was phenomenal. He could get that extra effort out of anybody. After attending there for a couple of years, I was fortunate enough to get a full ride to the University of Berkeley. So that worked out great. He was very aggressive and a strong coach, and you learned to adapt real quickly with him.
You were a champion, and I mean, it just seems like you had a real successful background in sports. Can you share that with us?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who are very, very gifted and diamonds in the rough, as coaches used to call them. But the real appreciation that I had was for the people that had the commitment and worked through difficult situations. There are an awful lot of guys that I went to school with who had more talent than I did, more talent than a lot of people, but never capitalized on it. It goes back to that recognizing opportunities, or if you've been blessed with something, to take advantage of it. So Coach Lambert was extremely effective at getting the 100% maximum ability out of you. So, yeah, we did win state championships at the community college, and then I went to Berkeley, and we actually won NC2As both years, so that was a good experience.
And then you went to the World Games?
Yeah, during the summers, we went to the Student World Games in Moscow one year, and then Tungsten Cup in Budapest in Hungary, so I got some good travel opportunities out of that. So I played until I got out of school, and then actually I was thinking of going on for an MBA, and I went to Berkeley Graduate School and got the application, started filling it out, and the fellow next to me was talking about mathematical analysis of marketing models, and I just was listening to all this. I said, this is just not me. And I got up, I remember it very clearly, and took the application, went over, threw it away, and said, I'm out of here. Finished school up, so I stopped water polo at that point in time, which was great because in 1980, the Olympic team boycotted the Olympics, so the guys who trained for the rest of the year and made the team didn't even get to go anyway, so timing was good. And I was anxious to get out and start working, so that opened up some new opportunities for me.
I want to reiterate that. You said there were a lot of people that were what you felt more talented than you, but because you were so committed, that made the difference. And I love that. So many people think people are just born successful or talented, and I always say I'd take somebody that has a little less talent and more commitment, because they're going to win.
Boy, isn't that the truth? And that's like in the boys' book, they say something like confidence is a decision, and it's a commitment, and that's really what it is. It's an attitude. So at that point in time, I used to say, well, if I'm here, I'm going to give it 100% of my effort because I'm committing the time, so why not get the best results possible? So anytime you do something like that, you want to make sure you get the best benefit of your time, because you can't go back and recapture it. It's gone.
Well, clearly, that's why you're a national champion, right?
Yeah, we won the NC2As. Actually, one year I was fortunate. I got MVP in the NC2A tournament when we won, so that was a great way to go out. It was a real good experience for me.
Well, you're clearly committed. I mean, it seems like no matter what you do, you are so committed to it.
And that's just so basic. It's one of my best quotes that I really enjoy. I remember reading the boys a book when they were probably 5 or 6 years old, and the bottom line of the book, it said the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is just a little bit extra. So, if you're making 90% of the commitment to be ordinary, why not make the 10% more and be extraordinary? Because that's all it is.
And then you graduated, top of your class, very impressive. And then your first business was in T-shirts?
Actually, yeah, I was waiting for a job I had coming available, which was in a health maintenance organization like a Kaiser plan, and that was probably going to open in a month or two. So my wife and I jumped in our little Volkswagen Squareback for a honeymoon and drove through Mexico. On the way back from Mexico, we were down there for a month. We camped on a public beach in La Paz area. This big motorhome pulled in next to us, and we're in our little Volkswagen camped in a tent, and we started talking to him. And he said, "Hey, kid, have you ever seen the movie Endless Summer?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that's my favorite movie of all time." It was that surf movie, traveling around the world. Yeah. And turned out this guy was Blackie August, which is Robert August's dad. Oh. Robert August is one of the two guys in the movie. So he said, "You ought to go by and check out and meet my son when you go through Long Beach." And so we did, and ended up getting into the screen print T-shirt business because they were doing T-shirts and things down there. And we said, "Hey, until my job opens up, I can sell T-shirts, to bars and restaurants and do the old self-liquidating premium." And I thought that was a great way for people to spend their advertising dollars. So I started doing that and waiting for this job to open up. And I had so much fun and ended up hooking up with Adidas and licensing a graphics line through Gary Patterson, an artist. And I was having so much fun doing that. I passed on the HMO and stayed in that business and got some great experience at a young age working with different trade conventions and salespeople around the country.
So then you went from the shift from T-shirts into real estate?
Actually, my father-in-law worked for a local real estate company. He's been in business for about 50 years, and he kept telling him about his son-in-law who's doing this and doing that. And so the broker was nice enough to invite me out to lunch and talk to me, and we got along real well. And he said, "If you want to come in and work in real estate, I'll sell you half the company in a year." And that sounds like a good opportunity to me. So I came in and worked as an agent for a year, and it worked out real well for both of us. So I ended up buying half the company from him. And I always believed in real estate as an investment anyway. So I said, that's where I want to put my money, so I might as well put my time in there as well. So that opened up some really good opportunities.
And you were in Phoenix?
Well, no, we were in Sunnyvale. But then at one time, early in my career, the real estate market was pretty much clobbered because of interest rates. They went as high as, I think, 15, 16%. This really isn't an option to be buying and selling real estate. So I was aware of these FHA and VA loans, which were assumable by anybody. The greatest number of FHA and VA loans that I could find that were in a range that made sense was in Phoenix, Arizona. So we went to Phoenix, Arizona, and hooked up with a broker there, and we started buying and assuming FHA and VA loans. So we bought a few hundred houses in Phoenix, and then also Colorado Springs and Corpus Christi, Texas, and Las Vegas. And I just set up a program where I would charge investors basically $800 or $900 per transaction. Then I'd get a referral fee from the broker down there and give the investor the opportunity to participate in real estate out of state where they could still control their fate and not be part of a big partnership. And they could determine when they wanted to sell. And so then we set up a management company to manage them, and that kind of tied us up for about 10 or 12 years. It was good. It was just a way to get around a difficult market at the time in our area.
It just requires that you see opportunities and then you take them.
Yeah, and we were assuming 7% loans and 7.5% loans with no loan fees. At that time, it was pretty attractive.
So what made you decide to sell your business?
Once again, just looking at different market options, and I saw people who were purchasing apartment buildings and subdividing them into condominiums. So I thought that would be a great thing to do with commercial buildings. And so I approached two investors down there and said, if they want to put the money up, I've got an idea. And we bought a small industrial park in Sunnyvale with 24 units in it. And then I went through the process with the city to subdivide that. And so I subdivided, and we ended up with 24 individual titles. And then we sold those off. So it worked out real well. Nobody had really done that at that point. People had built small buildings and offered them individual sales, but not converting existing buildings. So that was a neat little market. So I had a lot of fun doing that and jumped on it after I did the first one and set up projects in probably 4 different cities. I would typically sell half and keep half, and that would give me the money to buy the next one. That was a lot of fun. I met a lot of neat people because I was working with small businesses, and it gave me a chance to wheel and deal and trade. I took jet skis and oriental rugs and all types of things for down payments. So at that point, I was doing fairly well, and then some of the larger builders said, geez, this looks like an opportunity. And one in particular came on the market and built several 100,000 square feet, but built the wrong product. So got in trouble, and also they flooded the market. I would sell one in Sunnyvale, one in Cupertino, maybe one in San Jose, and a month, just work my way through the project. When you dump 50 units on the market or 60 units on the market, it's too much for the market to absorb, and they were unable to carry it, and so as a result, they were dumping them, and the banks took them back, and got to be pretty difficult there for a while.
You made a big decision.
Yeah, well, that's when we actually went to New Zealand. We were so fortunate because, just like you said, you love what you're doing. We always say we've never worked a day in our life because it's a pleasure. And one morning I woke up and asked my wife if she was having fun anymore, and she's still running the T-shirt business. She said, no, not really, and we were just kind of doing it for the money and kind of in a routine. It was really interesting. I heard at church, the minister said that when you're in a rut, it's no different than a grave other than you have both ends knocked out. Yeah, so I said, how many of us get in that rut and don't even crawl out but just stay in it because it's easier? So I said, it's time to go. So I rolled over and picked up the phone. It's like 6:30 in the morning and made reservations for 4 people, 2 boys, 6 and 8 at that time. And I said, let's go. So we went down there, just rented a little camper van, traveled around for a month, and then came back and said, okay, let's do it. And then, of course, by then, we're just involved in so many different things that it took us a couple of years to clean up our situation, relieve ourselves of enough of the responsibilities to be able to leave. So we did that.
So did you have relatives or anyone in New Zealand?
No, we didn't know anybody there. We just flew down there and drove around, met some people while we were there, of course. And then it was just fate played its role again. It was just very fortunate. I met one person, and she said, I really want 10 acres on the water with big trees. He said, well, you'll never find that. And I said, well, you keep your eyes open, and if you run across it, let me know. Well, within 60 days, he called me and said, you're not going to believe this. I just found 10 acres on the water with big trees. I mean, it's exactly what I had requested. So I flew down there and met the old fellow who owned it, Owen, and over a period of about a year and a half, I was even going down there staying at his house when I would go down there. And finally, one morning, he said, you really want that property, don't you, boy? And I said, Owen, I really do. I said, it's just spectacular. It's split level, so I could put a saltwater lake in down below, and I had geothermal potential and all types of things. So he slid a piece of paper. He was a real savvy real estate person himself, so he slid a piece of paper across the table in the morning and said, okay, write your terms. So we wrote it up, and then I said, I looked at the map. I said, Owen, who owns the property behind this block? He says, well, I do. I said, well, would you sell that to me? He says, okay. So, well, who owns the property on the other side of me? He goes, well, I do. Well, would you sell that to me? So it's kind of ironic. So I bought that, and then I pulled into town about 3 months later to finalize some things, and I saw an auction sign. It turned out that the 4 acres on the other side of me on the water was going for sale. So I ended up negotiating that and buying that as well, and then I ended up selling it to the person for what I paid for it, the person who had found the 10 acres for me. So I got to pick my own neighbor, and he's just a great friend. As a matter of fact, he's in our property in Australia right now today. I just spoke to him yesterday. So he's been a good friend. So we got to live next door to each other and put our ponds in together, and he taught me how to shoot levels and drive a bulldozer, and it was just a neat situation. So we had kind of a fantasy life down there for about 4 years, building our place and the lakes and enjoying New Zealand as a change of life.
Now, didn't you end up owning some place down there where people could stay? It was like a lodge?
The property was pretty magical. We ended up putting in a helipad and a 1 acre saltwater lake that flushed with a harbor with the tides, and thousands of native plants and a little putting green, a small golf course, and it was just a neat property. So we ended up turning it into a high-end lodge. So downstairs we had 4 rooms and a gym and a kitchen and a wine cellar and that sort of thing. So we turned that into a lodge, and we just had some great people come through there. Michael Crawford, singer of the Phantom of the Opera, as well as huge business people like Scott Cook, who owned QuickBook or started QuickBook into it, and just some phenomenal people from Europe. So it was a great experience. We met a lot of neat people and had a lot of fun, but certainly wasn't a profitable venture.
Sounds like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun. So we did that for probably 5 or 6 years, and then swapped out some time actually for a motorhome in the U.S., and then brought the boys back and did a quick trip around the U.S. and homeschooled them while we did that, and stayed with a lot of guests who'd been at the lodge and learned about U.S. history and that sort of thing. Put them in a public school in East San Jose. We knew the coach there, so they just attended for 90 days. And that's when we really had a change in our life, because we went back to New Zealand. and figured that was it. And one night there was a bunch of emails that came in from one of my boys' teachers in the U.S. I said, Kent, we had one computer at that time, right? So I said, hey, there's some emails here from your teachers. And he goes, oh, yeah. So I wonder what's up with that. So he checks it out. And he says, well, I wrote them a thank you note, and they just responded. And I said, well, what was the thank you note for? He said, well, they made me a better student, and I think I'm capable of more than I thought I was. And so I just wrote them a quick note. I said, that's a great thing to do, because teachers need that kind of acknowledgement, and good for you for recognizing that. So about a month later, he comes back and says, hey, Dad, I love New Zealand, but do you think we could move back to the U.S. to finish our high school? And what he had done, he'd gone back to New Zealand. He was a good student, not great, and he was actually in about lower 20% of his class for graphics. But by going back and changing his attitude and changing his beliefs and what he's capable of and making a better effort, he actually went to probably the top 2% in the country. They have a program down there where they test you at the end of Form 5, and the average good grade on a Form C test is in the 60s. Well, Kent got a 98, and she said she'd never even heard of anybody getting a 98. And so that renewed confidence and his attitude as a result of him attending school in the States, because we hear all these negative things about the States, but one of the positive things that we do very well is to encourage people to do the best that they can, and they may not be gifted in some areas that other people are, but through extra effort, you can accomplish things that maybe you otherwise wouldn't have. So it's once again, it goes back to that you element, right? You got to take responsibility. Yeah. You've got to make an effort. So we ended up coming back to the States, and we said, okay, we'll come back for 3 years, let you finish up school and have some fun, and then we'll come back. And we're still here.
Wow. So how long ago was that?
That was about 5 years ago,
okay.
6 years ago.
So then your boys came back and they finished high school here?
Well, one's going to UCLA, and Kent was going to a local community college, but he's taking time off now because he's co-writing a couple of books.
Well, I want to take a minute and just have you share what they're doing now, because it's so impressive.
The first book that they wrote was called Cool Stuff They Should Teach in School. Cover says, like, cruise into the real world with style, and it's about getting the right fundamentals of life and learning how to control your attitude, learning how to set goals, learning how to communicate with others. So they spent 3.5 years reading different books and putting together what they thought were all the fundamentals. And like in sports, you learn the fundamentals. This is one of their lines. And when they played basketball and water polo, you need to learn the fundamentals. If you can't dribble, pass, or shoot in basketball, you're not going to win the game, and you're probably even going to get hurt. So you learn the fundamentals, and you'll enjoy the game. So they said, why not learn the fundamentals of life, and you're enjoying the game of life a lot more. It's really been great for them to do all the research. They've read some great books by a lot of really good authors and then put it together.
It's a great book. Yeah, I've known Mark Victor Hansen for a long time, and I was sitting at a table with him and some women, and one of the women said, yeah, you have kids at this age, they're motivated, they've got direction, they know what they're doing, clearly their parents have done a great job. And I thought, yes, I know them. So can you share what happened when you went to your sons and were talking to them about parenting and barriers?
That was kind of a surprise. One of the books that they're working on right now is a book called Cool Stuff My Mom Taught Me, Cool Stuff My Dad Taught Me. And they're interviewing kids around the country and find out what's the most important thing. As a parent, you guys, I would have loved a little guide to flip through and say, geez, you don't really know what's important to a kid. You think you're teaching them what's important, but you'd like to get it from a young person's point of view. And so they said, yeah, okay, that's cool. So I said, well, why don't you guys tell me what you think the best thing that I taught you was as a dad? Kyle said, you gave us boundaries, but no barriers. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, we knew what we couldn't get away with, because I was pretty strict, so there was boundaries of what was expected of them, but also we knew that anything was possible. I thought that was pretty cool. So that's kind of been what the way they've lived their lives. I mean, we've given them enough rope to let them learn, especially when they're younger, when the tuition is small. They're giving us a bad time the night we had dinner. They said, we can't believe you let us just run the hills of Cupertino like that. We were 6 years old, and they weren't. They were probably 8 or 9. But, running through the hills with rattlesnakes and scorpions, and we let us go all day. And they said one time we found a tree, and it had bark that looked like fruit roll-ups. And so they decided they'd eat this bark, and neither one of them would would admit to the other one that it was bad, so they ate all this bark, and and they were giving us a bad time for being poor parents because we just let them go out and do that kind of stuff. That was important for them to learn so many of those lessons. We thought we were pretty tight and controlling, but that one thing I think young people need is the ability to make some decisions, make some mistakes, and feel that they're responsible for that. And if we, I think, sheltered them too much, they wouldn't have taken the responsibility for their actions.
So, is that the Cool Stuff Media?
No, the one that they're co-authoring with Jack Canfield, the Success Principles for Teens, that's about 90% done. And the 1 Minute Student, they're probably about a third of the way through that. So they're into, and they're doing about 4 others too. The problem is you've got so many, it's almost like what I've explained to my wife. I said every asset now is a liability. And they get so many options, and one of their challenges is to stay focused because you can only do so much.
When you're doing something you love, it's easy to get on another tangent or look at another opportunity, isn't it? So often we have so many projects going on, and because we know people can benefit from them.
Well, I know, I'm sure guilty of that.
Aren't we?
I think it's great to have kids be able to look at something that they can set a role model for other than Madonna or the Olsen twins. I just love the idea of having them put together basically what you're doing here, but the defining moments for young people, like what gave Kelly Slater the motivation to put 5 hours a day into surfing, as well as working out and the physical requirements that he needed to develop. And there's so many people, the young people actually just take for granted and say, that guy's lucky. And they don't realize what commitment these kids did. So I'm hoping that they can accomplish and reach a lot of kids, and they can get a better appreciation of what these other young people did, or what they did when they were young people, to get to the levels that they are now.
Even adults. I mean, look at it. How many people say, oh, you're lucky? They don't realize that luck, that overnight success, took 30 years to achieve. I mean, just listen to the founder of McDonald's. We're all just overnight successes.
Right. Yeah, well, actually, my brother's a good example. He's a great guy. He worked with the YMCA and working on his own and not really having a lot of success. And he came and worked for my wife and I. And after about 6 months, he said, my gosh, he said, I used to see people driving big cars, and I'm thinking, boy, aren't they lucky. And he said, after seeing how you guys work, he said, I see somebody driving a big car, and I think, oh, my gosh, they must work. And he was like 25, 26-year-old before that even clicked.
I mean, the bottom line, it's really about choices, isn't it? And taking the action. If they're not, they're going to stay living in that trailer, right?
Well, that's right. Yeah, I just heard Kent speak the other day, and one of his lines, which was great, I don't know where he picked that up. He said, the only thing that comes without effort is old age. And I think that's so true because, it does require effort, it does require commitment, and it does require sacrifices. And that's the other thing I told them at an early age. If you're not willing to make the sacrifices to become the person you want to be, sacrifices, then accept the fact you're never going to change. So that's, and the secret, I've seen that too, and of course it's done phenomenal, #1 on Amazon, #1 video as well as book. But to me, there really is no secret. It's a great marketing campaign, but it's really all about responsibility and making it happen, not letting it happen.
Well, one of the things you said when you're talking about this house is you were very clear on your intentions. You stated it, you were very clear on what you wanted, and then it just appears. And it's amazing what happens when we get clear on something and we put our attention to it, right?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of that as well, too, and I believe in that. I believe in positive affirmation and believing in projecting what you want, but I also know that you've got to make an effort to have it materialize.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about the You element. That sounds like a great book.
Yeah, and that's just the concept of taking responsibility for your actions. And so they say you won't find that on a periodic table, but it's one of the most important elements, and that's taking responsibility for your own actions. So that's some of the things that the boys address and that they came up with in doing their research was attitude, of course. They said in the You element is the attitude of I have to versus I get to. Kids say, I have to go to school, or we say we have to go to work, we have to this, and really, in reality, we get to. It's a privilege to do so many of the things we do when you look at what other people are affecting. So many things that affect other people. The whole concept there is just try to get people to be aware it is up to them. You know what's been reassuring, though, in that when they were doing the book, I said, guys, I think this could be good, and I think that a lot of parents are going to be interested because they know that child could have probably a better attitude and could also learn how to manage their money more effectively and could also learn how to set goals. But I said, your challenge is going to be to make it interesting enough that young people are going to buy into this. And I said, Kent told me one time, we're talking one night, and I said, geez, I just can't understand these kids, why they just don't get it. He looked at me and said, Dad, he goes, you don't get it. He said, we're the weird ones. Anyway, what we found out is that so many kids are hungry for this information. That's been really very reassuring to me. An example was Kent spoke at a community college and talking about his book and attitude and goals, and about, I don't know, half the class bought the book. And next time he showed up to class, one of the students came up to him, and he was the typical, I hate to say skinhead in a negative sense, but, he had the leathers and the shaved head and the piercings, and he didn't buy a book that day that Kent spoke. But next time Kent came to class, he walked over to him privately and said, hey, Kent, do you have an extra copy of that book?
Oh,
and so I said, what a great story, Kent, because what that tells you is that he is maybe acting the way he is or dressing and leading that type of lifestyle, maybe out of default. And maybe nobody taught him those skills. And so as a result, rather than acting ignorant or being uncomfortable, he just chose to say, well, this is the way I am. And in actuality, he wanted those tools. And unfortunately, he wasn't exposed to them. And then we get emails from kids that, hey, dude, your book changed my life. A lot of kids just said they never really thought about this, never really thought about that. And when it's explained to them in an easy-to-read, fun format, and it's not being lectured to by, as the boys say, a teacher, a parent, or some lame psychologist, then the kids listen. So I think there is a lot more hope out there than sometimes we give them credit for.
Well, I think a lot of those kids have never had role models.
It's really, they're a product of their environment. They have to take responsibility, but at the same time, so many parents just don't get a clue. One person on the plane was great. They were talking to me. He said, do you ever notice how all these kids down here in Orange County are being raised like they're trust fund babies? And I said, yeah. And he said, and the reality is, there's no trust fund. And he's right. I mean, we know people basically who are up to their eyeballs in debt, but they're driving nicer cars than we are and taking great vacations, but they're going to have to be held accountable at some point in time. The whole delayed gratification concept, that's one of the things they talk about in the book, is we all want it now. And the younger people, the younger generation is even more impatient. And so there's something to be said about delayed gratification. If you want something, having a plan and working for it. And I always get a lot more enjoyment out of something when it's taken me a while to get it.
Have you ever read Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman?
No,
He's done a ton of research, and it's based on somebody else's research, but it's all about being able to delay gratification. And it's fascinating, and it's all about determining success by being able to delay gratification. So I want to talk for a minute about how we met through a mutual friend, Peter Montoya, and he used to do a lot of work in the financial services, and I just love this story. And it's just hits so many points, so I'd love it if you could share it with us.
It's just so odd. Each time I get on a plane, I sit next to somebody who's just so interesting, has so much to offer. And that's one of the things I've learned, of course, is you can learn from anybody. But I've been so fortunate. I get on the plane, and everybody I run into seems to have something in an area that I could really benefit from or learn from. I sat on the plane once, and Peter was next to us, and he just come from a seminar. As you mentioned, he's just under so much pressure. He's such a phenomenal author and coach and financial planning business expert. And I think he was kind of just stressed out and tired, and we didn't really want to talk much. And so I just discussed a little bit. I just really wanted to pick this guy's brain and get all this information on branding. That's one of his specialties, of course. And I said, geez, that'd be great. But he just wasn't really in a talkative mood. So I said, well, here's a book. Take a look at it. And then followed up. He was in Orange County, so I followed up about a week later, and he said, well, why don't you bring your boys down, we'll go out to lunch sometime, we'll talk about it. And it sounded like he was real busy, and so are we. And I said, this probably really isn't going to go anywhere. He's a neat guy. I'd like to keep in touch, but hate to bug him, and we've got other things going. They kind of dropped it. About 6 months later, I get on a plane, and I see, oh, my gosh, that's Peter Montoya again. I said, I've got to get a hold of this guy. And I had been bumped up to business class, and Peter was like the first or second row on this flight. And I said, geez, how am I going to get to talk to this guy? He said, well, I guess it's just not going to happen. So maybe during the flight I'll get up and talk to him. Sat down, and sure enough, there was a problem with the flight. And they said, okay, which has never happened before. Everybody's got to get off the plane now. We're going to have to reassemble outside. We'll take another plane. Everybody boarded the wrong plane, apparently. They had the wrong gate. It wasn't a mechanical problem. airline just screwed up. I said, hey, well, this is great. This is an opportunity now for me to get this guy, Peter, again. He's in line. I walk up to him. I said, hi. I said, I think we've met before. And he looked at me and said, no, we haven't. I said, well, great. This is going well. So I said, no, actually, I think we have. And I said, I think your name is Peter. Yep. And he still wasn't impressed and didn't want anything to do with me. So I said, we flew together on a flight back from Denver about 6 or 7 months ago. I think we sat next to each other. Oh, yeah, great. Then we talked a little bit about the boys' book and what they're up to. And then we boarded the plane. I said, I had all these extra miles. So I said, why don't I just use these miles and see if Peter wants to come up to business class, which usually he does fly that. And I guess he couldn't get on this time. So I said, I don't want to appear to be, I don't know what the right word was, too gratuitous or whatever.
Yeah.
But I said, gee, Peter, I got these extra miles. You want to come up here? So the flight attendants pulled him up front. And so I said, great, now I get a chance to talk to this guy. So we talked for, an hour and a half, and it was just phenomenal. And he was just so generous. He said, tell you what, he invited us to one of the financial planning seminars, which is like a 2-day event, and that was absolutely phenomenal as his guest. And so we went to that and just had a great time. And so I started a new relationship there.
This is huge. Most people listening would say, oh, if he says no, there's nothing I can do, he won't do it. But the real key to success is being able to look at the no's and figure out how you can get a yes, which is what you did. And then when Peter emailed me and he said, you've got to interview this guy. He spoke so highly of you, and I knew it was going to be great. He's really busy, but he's great, and he'll be so good for you to have on an interview. And he was so impressed with you. And then I heard your story, and I'm like, oh, I've got to talk to this guy. And I think people don't understand that you took the action to get those results. And I just thought that was great.
Well, yeah, because it sure worked out. And to me, it was just the logical thing to do at the time. It didn't require any planning or thinking, right? That was the objective. So how could I make it happen? And it's just been so great because I've got so much respect for Peter, and he's done things that I could never do in developing his company and branding, and it's just a real privilege. So by making those little extra efforts opens up the opportunities that we otherwise never would have. For my boy to be able to go and hear Peter speak for 2 days, he came away and he was just blown away. And it just added a whole new experience to his life as well. So it's been great all the way around.
That's awesome. So I know you probably, like all of us, had some doubts and fears and even crossroads and not knowing what to do. What has gotten you through those points to get you from where you were to the other side?
Well, that's a good question. I just always will look at what's the worst situation, what's the worst that could happen, and then how would I deal with it? And I love that line, panic is not a strategy. When I would look at something and say, okay, rather than panic, let's size this up and let's see what's really the worst thing that can happen. Okay, now what are my options? So I'll list my options. And then I say, okay, what do I need to do to make those options materialize or those objectives? And then do a little quick game plan and then work your way through it. One of the quotes that I really like that I read a long time ago was, the longest journey begins with a single step. And so if I've had some things that are particularly challenging, it's how fast life goes by. So what I'll do is just take the first step and make it happen. Don't put it off. The other quote that I love is what it says, start each day by eating a live toad.
Oh.
That way you know it'll be the worst thing you have to face all day. So the objective is to eat your toads first thing in the morning, right? To have something that's difficult or I don't want to deal with it, rather than worry about it and then have it manifest into a bigger problem. I just deal with them.
Well, a lot of people listening are in my community and they understand high value activities, and it's amazing. But when we get really clear on those high value activities, and especially when we enjoy doing them, everything changes. I love what you're doing, and I love that you're so clear on that. You do those things the first thing, right? You get them out of the way so that you don't have to worry about them.
And it's still not always easy to do, because I'll shuffle and I'll put something aside and say, oh, I'll deal with that later. And then I kind of remember that old slogan, I'm going to have to deal with it anyway. So rather than worrying about dealing with it all day, I'll deal with it now and then do the more enjoyable things later on. So that's been something that has really helped me, is to just to understand that. That's the other thing that the boys say, that the only people who don't have problems are the people in the cemetery.
Yeah, that's like Vincent Peale. He goes, I want to know how I don't have problems. He goes, let me show you. And he took him to a graveyard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, yes, that's been one thing that's helped me, and to know that, and actually, and it's a corny thing to say, in every problem lies an opportunity. And so we've seen that so many times in our life. I said, okay, well, this is a challenge. Well, for example, in selling our place in New Zealand, because of the price that we sold it for, I ended up taking 40 properties up by Lake Taupo. Then I took another half-acre piece on the lake, and then I took a $2 million note, and then I took 3 acres of commercial property. In order to make it happen, I had to just kind of adjust what my goals were and what my desires were to what reality was. So I just made all the adjustments necessary. Now it's worked out fine because I'll sell the individual properties I took in as a trade for a profit. So I actually will come out ahead on the deal. That was an opportunity for me that I didn't even see at first. That's so often the case.
That's a great point. You know, the other thing you mentioned when we were talking earlier is the difference between smart man and wise man. Do you want to share that?
This is another quote I learned from my boys, and that was, he said something like, a smart man learns from his mistakes, and a wise man learns from the mistakes of others.
That's great advice.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that we try to capitalize on is looking at what somebody else has done, and rather than try to reinvent the wheel or pound our heads into the wall. And just because it hasn't worked with somebody else doesn't mean you won't be able to make it work, but I certainly want to learn the lessons from that person. You know, the example they give is Edison. Like, you know, if you were starting building a light bulb, would you start from scratch, or would you look at the experiments that Edison gone through and shortcut the learning experience? And that's the other thing we talk about, the school of hard knocks. It's a school that's attended by more people than any other university, any other school. Shorten your term in the school of hard knocks by asking questions and learning from others and taking advantage of that. I thought that was a pretty good way to live. Here's something that's kind of funny, and this may not be appropriate for the show, but Kent and Kyle flew out to Norfolk, Virginia this weekend, and they did a show called Living the Life. They did 20 little spots. So while they're on spots, they had their microphones on. You know, they had a headset. They're wired, actually, right? So as they're walking away, Kyle turns to Kent and says, "Man, do I have to go to the bathroom?" A little more graphic than that. And he looks at Kent, and Kent says, "Kyle, we're mic'd." And so Kyle says, "Look back, see if they're looking." So Kent looks back, looks at the production crew, and they're all just laughing. He goes, "Yeah, they heard you." And he goes, "Oh, no." And so it was just kind of a funny thing. So Kent said, "What a neat philosophy." He said, "A way to live your life as if you're mic'd." And I said, "Kent, that is so true, because so many times you say things that could be interpreted by somebody else wrong, could hurt somebody's feelings, or would be inappropriate if you were mic'd."
A friend of mine that talks a lot about emotional intelligence said, or that will be printed in the front page of the paper. You know, just a reminder that what you say, you got to really be careful about, because who knows who's recording it in this day and age, right?
Yeah.
Now, is there anything that you would have done differently than some of the things that you've learned?
I've really just kind of enjoyed the whole journey, so not too much. I think probably one thing I've learned now, I'm kind of like a deal junkie. So that philosophy I've had now, I'm kind of enjoying buying land that's either in the urban growth boundary or has some future growth in that area, and you find the land that has a multiple of maybe zoning opportunities, but is in the path of growth, so it's going to be swallowed up soon enough. So in any area where there's, be it in the United States, California, or any place in the world, if you've got a growth pattern, and it indicates that land will be utilized for a higher purpose than it is currently, then that makes sense. In the States, you can do that by looking at where some of the big chain stores are going, right, and what's developing around them.
Oh, that's a great point. What's your recommendation or input about a person being diversified? Saying you now have the money, not just in real estate, having it in different areas.
Well, that's such a good question, and it's an absolute necessity, and that's one thing I know financial planners are so good at, is developing a diversified portfolio. Anytime I've done something out of my area of expertise, it's kind of come back to haunt me, and so the key there, of course, is hooking up with somebody who has the strengths that you don't. We came back from New Zealand, and we bought some stocks, and I stayed out of the market completely, because I said, how can something be worth 100 times earnings when there are no earnings? I said, this makes no sense. I buy on reproduction cost. So, if I buy a property, could I build it for less? No, I couldn't. Then it's probably a safe investment. If I'm buying something inflated value, which I believe the stocks were, but then after being here for a few months and seeing what everybody's doing on our trip around the country, I ended up buying stock. And I bought some for the boys, like $5,000 worth. And I remember driving in the RV someplace in North Dakota. I said, "Hey, guys, your stock is up like $5,000. You just made $5,000. And Kent, who's 15 years old, looked at me and goes, "Hey, Dad, are we going to sell it?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Well, we didn't make the money then." And I said, oh, wow, that's a good point. And by the time we sold it, we wrote it all the way down to about 30 cents. So it was a loser. And so that was just, we're in areas that we didn't have the expertise in. So we learned a lesson there.
Oh, that's great advice. If you're not qualified in the area, you need to find somebody who is. And I think sometimes people think because they're successful in one area that they're automatically going to be successful in another. And that's not the case.
I do believe in diversification, and I need to do more of it. So I have a pension plan, and we've put some stocks in there, and I've diversified to a certain extent by having trusteed income. But once again, it's secured by real estate. And then part of my diversification is different types of property in different areas. So if residential is not doing well, I've got a little bit of commercial, I've got a little bit of land, and then maybe if the economy in Orange County is not doing that well, in New Zealand it is. So that's kind of helped me too. Then that kind of diversification, but I know I haven't done as well as I should have in so many different areas.
Well, you probably wouldn't have been as successful, right? I mean, knowing is kind of like a double-edged sword. It's kind of like you've been successful because you've really focused on what you know and what you do well.
That's a good point, yeah.
That's good insight. I appreciate that. If you're sitting down with somebody and you are mentoring them, and they were, say, for instance, going to take over your position, what are 3 recommendations that you would give them? I'm just talking common sense things that you would do. You're obviously given some huge philosophies and takeaways, but are there any specifics that you would provide a person on what to do or how to do it that could really help them?
Well, I guess the number one thing for me is enjoy life and be enthusiastic. And that's been real natural for me because I love so many things, and I can develop an interest in anything from running a bulldozer to pulling in a solar system to building a mini storage, and everything is exciting to me. And that's one of the compliments I got in New Zealand quite a bit was, people would come out to work on the job and said, I heard about you in town. Somebody said you're the most enthusiastic person they'd ever met. And so that's been fun for me. So number one, and enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm, as they say. It just makes enjoying life so much easier. So that would be number one, probably would just be enjoy life and be enthusiastic. Second one that I think is real important is treat everyone you meet with respect, regardless of what their background or their financial situation is, and you can learn from every one of them. And that's really been good for me. Maybe not financially, but I get so frustrated when I don't get a phone call back from somebody or something gets ignored. And I don't care if it's somebody who works for me on an hourly basis who comes in to do yard work, whatever they call, I'm going to call them back because I think they deserve that respect.
Yes, it does come around.
Absolutely, yeah. It does in so many ways. The other one, I guess, would be have an attitude of gratitude. Appreciate what you've been given. So many people don't, and they look for the things they don't have instead of the things they do have that they don't appreciate. There's one guy actually came and worked for me. He was the golden boy of San Clemente, they said, and he came and worked for me for about 2-3 weeks before he went to Berkeley. Neat kid. I asked him to do a few things. He said, look, I bought this property. I want you to run through the termite report and make sure the work was done. I want you to do this. And so he kept nodding his head. I didn't think he understood me. And I said, Bo, do you really understand what I'm saying? Yeah, yep. I said, okay, and I repeated it again. So, okay, yep. So anyway, a week later he comes back, and I said, well, how did it go? Did you get that done, Bo? And he looked at me. He said, you know what? What would you do, Doug, if you were in a meeting and somebody's explained something to you and you really don't understand it? And I said, you mean like last week when we had that meeting? He says, yeah. And I said, I knew you didn't have a clue, and that's why I asked you, and that's why I repeated it again. But I said, at some point in time, I had to let it go. And I said, just understand right now, the one thing that you want to learn in life is don't try to baffle anybody with the bullshit. And if you don't understand, say, this job is so important to me, I want to make sure I do the best job I can for you. And in order to do that, I need to understand exactly what you want. So then I said, if you don't know, just say you don't know, because people can read through that. And then we just kind of let it go. And about 2 months later, I heard from him. He called me on a Sunday afternoon. He said, Doug, yeah, hi, this is Bo. He said, you remember me? Of course I do. And he goes, well, I just wanted to thank you. I said, for what? He said, well, you remember that day you spent some time with me? I said, yeah. He said, well, I got a job because of you. And he goes, when somebody changes your life, I figured you owe them a call. And I said, well, what happened anyway? And he just told me about the job interview he did and what he said. And it was just kind of neat because something that insignificant, you'd think, to a young person, very talented kid, bright kid, but he just hadn't heard that little thought before. So sometimes as adults, we think these things are such common sense. That's what I tell my boys, that's common sense. And they say, well, Dad, I checked my DNA, and that's not in there. And so I think that's probably the most important thing, right, is just to tell people to be honest, straightforward, and upfront.
Oh, my gosh. What great advice. Thank you so much for joining us today. So there you have it. Wasn't that unbelievable? I love the insight that Doug shared with us. So again, I really encourage you to listen and apply that insight. So please hit subscribe so you get notified of episodes as well as bonuses, because that's how you get access to those. Today's episode is sponsored by Mindset Mastery. Let's face it, whether you want to grow your business, improve your life, or have better success with your money, you've got to master your mindset. And in our Mindset Mastery special training, I teach you how. You can go to millionaireseries.com/mindset mastery to access this free training. And today's free guide is our Millionaire Habits Guide. You can go to millionaireseries.com/MHG to access that free resource. I really encourage you to take advantage of this. So thank you so much for joining us. This is Annette Bau, host of the Millionaire Insider. All international copyrights are reserved. So there you have it, my friends. Wasn't that insightful, motivating, inspiring? I just love that conversation. It was so helpful. And I guarantee you, if you apply even a fraction of what he shared with us, it's going to dramatically improve your odds of succeeding in your business, in your life, and with your money. So just go do it. So again, thank you so much for attending. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Bye now.